the thing about it, the thing that really makes Disc stand out is the simplicity of telling who other people are without them doing a test. Right. So basically, like one of the things I like is when some random dude I've never met comes in and sit down to me next to me in an airplane, I
Yep.
can generally tell him things about himself that he doesn't know. And that is an ability that no other behavioral model gives you, right? Like most of these behavioral models, they're always like, oh, can you take this 20-page
Yeah.
test? And then I will know who you are. But the
Yep.
problem is that, first of all, some people don't know themselves that well. And that means that how they answer questions is very subjective. Second of all, particularly if you're looking at it from a hiring perspective, when you're looking at it, like when employees feel they're getting evaluated, they very often answer what they expect you want to hear
Yep.
rather than what they really think. And no
Yep.
matter how much you tell them that's not the case, that is how the human brain works, right?
Welcome to Show Me the Nuggets, where each week Joe chats with world-class entrepreneurs to find out the key principles, strategies, and processes that lie behind their outstanding achievements. Now, your host, the no bullshit serial entrepreneur, Joe Troyer.
Hey everybody, it's Joe Troyer and welcome back to another episode. I'm super excited for today. It's actually early morning, recording this about 5 a.m. Eastern my time, and I'm up early to talk and to chat with our guest. And again, guys, I'm super excited. So our guest is Mads Sorensen. So Mads is the management coach and owner of Mads Singers Management Consulting and also owner of Aristo Sourcing. So Mads' expertise really comes into people management and building a team and hiring VAs and outsourcing and SEO. And you guys know that, we supposedly got our act together when it comes to building a team and hiring and outsourcing. I'm really, really excited to have Mads on today because that's his true focus and that's his true core. So just a little bit about Mads before we bring him on. He's worked as a management coach for more than 6 years, and he's coached people in large organizations such as Coca-Cola and Shell, as well as small companies like ours. So he's also an expert in the DISC behavior framework, and I want to deep dive on some of his management tactics and training tactics so that we can all take our businesses to the next level. So Mads, man, welcome to the call.
Well, thank you very much, Joe, and thanks for the very warm welcome. It's definitely a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to share.
Awesome, man. Awesome. So before we dig in deep and we start looking for the nuggets, so to speak, can you give us a quick background on how you got into management coaching and kind of what you're doing today?
Definitely. I mean, when I was even smaller than I already am, I was studying IT, and I was a very IT-ish nerdy guy. And what happened was when I was 18, I kind of quit my education and I got an IT job, which I thought was gonna be life. However, what happened with my first job was I actually got a manager, and she was just, yeah, blew me out of the water. She was so good, and like, most jobs I've ever heard about, people hated it and all that sort of stuff. But I saw the team, I saw how happy everyone was, and that really made a huge impression. And literally within 6 months of starting in that company, I changed from wanting to be the IT dude to wanting to be a people manager, right? Because I wanted to make that influence on other people. And I started, like, I had no education in it. I started studying frantically, and I probably read a book a week for about 10, 12 years or so. So a lot of my knowledge is self-taught. I paid for a ton of like seminars and events out of my own pocket initially. So I learned a ton of stuff. I eventually got into management. First, I worked in Xerox, and then I changed to IBM later on. And it was super great places to get a lot of management experience. And IBM particularly, I mean worldwide. I ended up managing people in UK, Eastern Europe, and Philippines, and I got a ton of exposure, so that was really good. While I worked at IBM, I actually started coaching people already. I started sort of, I had some colleagues that was like, oh, I want to be better and stuff. I started out like that. Then eventually, like, I've always been big time into networking, so I started coaching people from the outside. And then over time, I just, yeah, one step took the next, and one day I was kind of like, hey, wait a minute, I'm working 60 hours a week for IBM. and I'm doing 10 hours of coaching every week. And the coaching actually pays me better. Maybe I should stop doing the 60 hours, and that I did. So
Awesome.
that's basically how it started, and yeah, we're nearly 7 years now. Here in August, it's 7 years. So that's how I started out. And then ever since then, I moved to the Philippines and spent a lot of time there now. And I started out my outsourcing business because I saw a lot of the people, a lot of entrepreneurs I was coaching, they really struggled to find good outsourced workforce, right? So I started an outsourcing business as well. One of the key things that we find is that people really, a lot of online business owners, they aren't great managers, right? So what we're really doing is really trying to help them manage the VAs with them, and take care of more the personal side of things. And when people have personal issues, and very often business owners don't handle that very well, which often means they have problems with people not performing or people leaving and things like that. So yeah.
Okay, so you kind of bridge the gap, so to speak, between the outsourcers and the team and the entrepreneur or the visionary, so to speak.
Exactly. And today, I mean, our key focus, the businesses we work mostly with from an outsourcing standpoint, is SEO and e-commerce businesses.
Okay.
Again, I really love process-driven things because they are generally easy to outsource, right?
Yep.
And they're sort of our sort of main business areas. But again, we have clients in pretty much any niche. So
Okay. Yeah, yeah, definitely want to deep dive on some of those systems and processes that you guys are running and the things you find, all these businesses doing, whether it's e-com or SEO and kind of the core things there. But let's stay a little high level just for a second. So my team, when they were doing research and getting ready for us to have this podcast with you, said that definitely they found that it seems like you're a little obsessed with disc. Can you talk us through that and talk to us about why? What is it and why the fascination there, I guess?
right. So first and foremost, I don't think I'm a little obsessed. I think I'm a lot obsessed with this. But 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 besides that, yeah, I mean, for me, it's what made my management career. It was,
Yep.
I mean, when I started studying and find it it's the reason why I've gotten to where I am today, right? That there's a lot of personality and sort of behavioral models out there, right? Like Myers-Briggs is very common and so on. The thing about it, the thing that really makes DISC stand out is the simplicity of telling who other people are without them doing a test, right? So basically, like one of the things that I say it all the time, but one of the things I like is when some random dude I've never met comes in and sit down to me next to me in an airplane, I
Yep.
can generally tell him things about himself that he doesn't know,
Yep.
right? And that is an ability that no other behavioral model gives you, right? Like most of these behavioral models, they're always like, oh, can you take this 20-page
Yeah.
test? And then I will know who you are. But the
Yep.
problem is that, first of all, some people don't know themselves that well,
Yep.
right? And that means that how they answer questions is very subjective. Second of all, particularly if you're looking at it from a hiring perspective, when you're looking at it, like when employees feel they're getting evaluated, they very often answer what they expect you want to hear
Yep.
rather than what they really think. And no
Yep.
matter how much you tell them that's not the case, that is how the human brain works, right? So for me, in majority of cases, like when I get emails from people, like I can get a simple email from people, and that can often tell you a ton about their personality and who they are, right? And the ability to really read people through natural behaviors is really so powerful because it tells you the motivations, it tells you how they want to communicate, it tells you like all of this good stuff, right? And when you learn to be able, I mean, it takes a little bit of while to get into it, but majority of my clients, again, they learn to love it as much as I do, right? And they really, like, from an interview perspective, from finding the right people, like again, right? Like,
Most people don't understand that. And I think the second thing with personality types is, and I'm sure it's the same for DISC, is as an entrepreneur, as an individual, what types of people or personality traits you work best with.
Yeah, and so the one thing I would generally say is I like having a good mix of people in teams, right? Like when I build companies, when I build teams, like I have a fair mix of people, right?
Okay.
But the whole thing is like some people naturally breathe and dream about spreadsheets, right? And for some people they make no sense. Like for
Yep.
some people, even learning simple things like formulas and stuff can be really, really challenging. And
Yep.
the whole thing as a human being, if you want to learn to be exceptional, you need to learn to profit on your strength, right?
Okay.
You need to
Yep.
push your strength. All these people that are like, oh, I'm not good at this thing, I want to learn it. That's the road to perdition, right? Like it's not the way to do things.
Yep.
Yes, there's certain things, and the only one thing that I recommend all human beings to work on is communication, right? Because we all communicate, and if you're not an effective communicator, no matter what other skills you have, that can
Yep.
bring you down.
Yep. I would 100% agree. It's kind of like diversification, right? Like, why would you diversify versus going all in? So we could have that combo all day. So let's say that people are familiar with like Myers-Briggs, right? Like the main advantage, like I am, the main advantage of DISC, you would say, from the outside looking in, like just highest level, is being able to spot the traits in people and being able to understand like what type of person is, right? With Myers-Briggs, you got to take, yeah, you're right, like that 10, 15, 20-minute assessment in order to understand.
And also in Myers-Briggs, like you have so many like 16 personalities or something. Like with
Yep.
DISC, you're really looking at four areas that
Okay.
mix, but it's basically four different areas that you need to remember, right? So it's much easier to remember, it's much easier to learn, it's much easier to manage and really use that to learn to read people.
So can you talk to us about the different types of personalities that, or the different types that come through after you do
Yeah.
the DISC framework?
Yeah, so I'll do it. I'll do it very high level, right? Because else
Okay.
this will be a 4 hour podcast really quickly.
I
Uh,
appreciate it.
so basically, the four personality type: the D, the I, the S, and the C.
Yep.
Um, the D's primarily is very competitive people, very goal driven, very Elon Musk type. Like I'll do whatever it takes to get there, right? So it's people who are very competitive. My wife is a great example. When she's playing cards with her 4-year-old niece, she'll cheat to make sure she wins because she hates losing that badly, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Um, they're generally very good at getting things done. Like they're often not the people that just read to read. They often read to learn something specific that they want to go and apply, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a high D, if you, let's say you want to start a podcast, you don't just go and read random stuff about podcast. You read
Yeah.
specifically how to start a podcast, etc. Right? So you have a very clear goal-driven purpose with doing what you do.
Yep.
The I's is the sort of typical salespeople, right? They love talking anyone, anywhere. They love hearing the sound of your own voice. Like, how is your day, Joe? Oh, my day is great. I'm doing this thing. Like they ask questions, they answer it themselves. They love hearing their own voice. They love talking to people. They're really, really powerful at networking because they talk to everyone everywhere. They know everyone everywhere. And my favorite example is that they're the ones that in school they're like, hey Joe, you're good at math, can you do my math job or my math, right? And
Yep.
that they're generally not good at doing things themselves. Actually, from a business and a management perspective, is often a huge advantage, right? Because if you no, but realistically, right, the entrepreneurs that get stuck is the one trying to do everything themselves. Whereas
Yep.
the high eyes, they're very, very good at delegating and finding people, and because they know so many people everywhere, they often find good people for the specific jobs, right?
I have a friend you would say is a very high I, and definitely he's put together a great team. It's taken him a long time, but he's putting together a great team, and he's an influencer, right? Like he's the guy, he's the connection guy. He knows everybody, and he's just the deal guy. He's the one in the background making all the deals happen. So makes a whole lot of
Exactly.
sense.
Yeah.
But I would have never have put the two together that he would be that right person to be the overseer, so to speak, of a business, right?
So so
Because
the
he's not a
weakness
manager, right? He's just good at connecting the dots.
the weaknesses they often have. So depending on so with DISC, everyone have a primary and a secondary personality type. So
Okay.
if you're really high I and you don't have any D, basically You often lack structure and organization, and that would likely be the challenge for your friend, right?
Yep.
Now, again, if he does get the right people in around him, like for example, if he have a personal assistant or something who is super organized, that can
Yep.
help bridge that gap. Or if he hire like operations managers or people around him who are the very different from him, that can really very much help bridge that gap, right?
Yep.
So
Awesome.
that's typically the high Is. Then the high S's, they are also people persons, but they are much more they're more introverted about it.
Yep.
They're more, I would love for someone to come over and say hello to me because I would love to talk to them, but I don't want to go and interrupt them, right?
Yep.
So you will always see them smiling. They're always happy, but they're often a little bit shy until you get to know them, right? These are the typical moms or the typical, let's sit down and have a company cake day every Friday and I'll bake a cake. And they want to make sure everyone else is happy and they care a lot more about other people than they care about themselves. So they're typical kind of nurses and that kind of profession, right?
Yep.
Also amazing people in customer service because yeah, I mean that's often a good skill set in customer service,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're generally, I mean, everyone says they're great human beings, right? Because they're always nice, they're always friendly, they don't have enemies, like they don't want to break any eggs and so on, right?
Okay.
So that's typical S. And then you have the typical C's, which probably a bunch of your audience would relate to. So that's the typical developer, accountants, nerdy, geeky, very detail oriented people.
Yep.
Love numbers, love spreadsheets, love data, love not having to interact with other human beings uh, a lot. A typical developer, I mean, if you ask them for a phone call, they'll be like, "Oh, let's just do this on Skype chat instead," right?
Okay.
Like they're often not very comfortable and confident when it
Yep.
comes to sort of physical conversations, right? So yeah, and they are generally, again, they're generally very reserved. They're very logical people. They would often dress up in very dark colors like black or gray or whatever. They would often be like, "Oh well, I don't care what I'm wearing as long as it's keep me warm." They
Yeah.
often uh, they often talk a lot if you talk about something they're passionate about. So if they're
Yep.
talking about business and they're a business person, they will talk. But if you start
Yep.
talking about gardening, they'll just shut up. Like they will
Yep.
listen, they'll listen. The information is great for them, but they won't add value if you don't talk about it. And generally, the fashion style of high seas is generally pretty not good unless their passion is fashion, right? So unless one of the key things they're passionate about is actually fashion, right? Um, so that's sort of very high level view of the four personalities.
So I'm assuming you know Myers-Briggs pretty well too, right?
Yeah.
That's I've found that over the years, like I don't work with Fs very well. I don't work very well with people who make decisions based upon feelings, right? For people who like go with their gut all the time instead of thinking about things realistically and making decisions based upon data and based upon numbers and based upon facts, and instead they're using their gut and they're feeling through the situation. So I found in my own businesses that having Fs around me is not so great because that's not how I believe in making decisions, and that's not how like the company culture I set makes decisions. So I found that Fs for me are just problematic. Your thoughts on that? Right, wrong, and different? Like, what do you think about that?
I would still have a mix of people. Like the thing is, if you have no emotions in the business, what often can happen is that people get forgotten, right? Like, I mean, the typical example for me is always like I love restaurants, right? Like if you're a group of friends, you're going out to a restaurant, right?
Yep.
And the emotional people will always say, "Oh, what the ambience like? What does the food presentation look like? Is it
Yeah.
something I want to Instagram?" Whereas logical people, they're gonna be very like, "What's the distance to the place? What's the price of the food? Is the food everyone can eat, etc." They're very logical, right? And the same
Yep.
thing in business, right? Like a lot of the time, business decisions are better when they're logical. However, if you really need to bring people on board, if you really need to like be a very motivational leader, being able to paint those emotional pictures can be really damn powerful, right? Like from a logical standpoint, you can say, oh, we have to hit this target, we have to hit this goal. Like you can drive people really hard, but the kind of leaders that paint up these big visions, that we're gonna take over the world, we're gonna build this the best app in the whole world to change the life of millions, and those kind of leaders, they're often very more emotional, right? So from a management standpoint, it's different ways to lead. I would generally say there's not a right or wrong. There is different ways of doing things, and
Yep.
I totally agree. I am also a logical person by nature, and I sometimes find it really hard when people make emotional decisions. But what
Yep.
I've learned over time is the people who make those emotional decisions often burns through on them much more. Like, because if you make a decision because you're like, I want that, right? Like that's what I want, right? Like an example could be company structure, right? Some people say, I want to build a company that's location independent. I want all of my staff to be able to work from wherever they want, right? That's not necessarily a logical decision, because that doesn't necessarily logically make a better company, but that's an emotional decision. Now, again,
Yep.
it's not right or wrong, but what you actually lose perhaps in productivity from doing it, you might actually benefit from the emotional benefit of being able to do that, right? So that's an example where it's not always a right or a wrong choice, and the emotional decision doesn't have to be wrong, but there's definitely some times where I get really, really annoyed when people make emotional decisions, such as, oh, well, it's a holiday and these people are very religious, so let's give them all day off. And you're
Yeah.
like, well, what about all our customers who actually need support? Um, oh, yeah, but I'm sure they can wait till tomorrow. And you're like, no, business
Yeah.
doesn't always work that way, right?
Yep.
Great, you
100.
want to give your staff time off, but yeah. So definitely there's a balance. I think it's important to have a little bit of both, because again, if you do become very logical, what can also happen is you lose touch with people a little bit, and particularly if you start building larger companies, you definitely want some people focused people in there who can be that emotional support in the team, right? And I mean, I guess from your perspective, like if people come up and tell you about their sick dog, or a husband is not feeling well and stuff, you're kind of sitting in the back of your mind and like, who gives a shit, right? Um, and that's the way your brain works, and that's
Yeah.
okay. That's you, right? But the
Yeah.
thing is, sometimes if you manage larger number of staff,
Yep.
um, you need people who can manage those kind of things.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I found just to that point that I'm not good managing big staffs, right? Like up to 30, no larger, because at 30, I think, between 25 and 30 and up, it becomes a very different skill set, right? And I think things change big time.
They do. And again, if you surround yourself with the right people, I mean, as an individual, you don't want ever 30 people reporting to you, right?
Yeah.
Ever. Um, that would ruin your life three times. But again, if you make sure you surround yourself with the right people and give them the ownership and the drive, again, theoretically, there shouldn't be anything wrong for growing bigger. But again, it's
Yep.
it's tapping into and learning to let go, right? Because like naturally I know it's the first time we speak, but naturally, like you want to get into the details. You want to make sure people are doing all the steps right, right? And some kind of tendency of micromanagement sometimes. So the challenge can be that you definitely have to learn to let go of that. Now,
Yep.
the question is, are you successful because of that, or are you successful despite of that? So that's a great question. And the thing is, you could probably learn a lot, and you could probably grow a lot as well yourself if you
Yep.
learn to tone that down slightly. Right?
Yeah, for sure. 100%. So when you're working with companies, you're helping companies, you're consulting, coaching people, what are like the fast start ways to get some wins with Disc? Like, what would you suggest? Like, here's how you use Disc, like right now. Like, here's how to get the benefits, or here's how to get the most. Like, give what's the 80/20 that somebody can kind of grab and start running with disc to start getting some advantages from it?
So the key thing for me is definitely around motivation and communication styles.
Okay.
So people are motivated differently, and I'll just try and run through the four different pillars again, right? So since we have a
Yep.
bit of framework, so the D's are very very motivated by money and power, right?
Yep.
So anything financial, anything powerful, cool titles, more responsibility, that sort of thing really motivates D's, right? And you should smile. Um, so that really really motivates D's, right?
Yep.
Eyes are really motivated by eyeballs. Like if you have a company of 1,000 people and you're giving out the award for worst performer of the year, Joe doesn't want to be on the stage. But a high I would love to be on a stage because they're like, hey, see me, attention. I don't care why I get attention, but see me, I'm over here, right?
Yep.
The high eyes, again, like they're the typical people, they would wear like a pink suit going out just to get attention, right? Like they
Yep.
don't give a shit why they get the attention, they just want the
Yep.
attention, right?
Yep.
And attention is number one. Now they are also somewhat money focused because most eyes have realized the more money they have, the more attention they can buy. So again, if you buy a pink Ferrari, you will get attention, right? So they're also somewhat money focused. Money is not really the important thing for them, but they realize what they can use money for from an attention standpoint, right? They
Yep.
always have the latest gadgets. They always have the latest iPhone and all that kind of stuff, right? Then the S's don't give a shit about money. Generally, if you give them a financial bonus to triple their salary as a bonus every month, if they hit a certain goal, they'll look at you and they'll say, okay, thanks, boss. And they won't give a shit.
Yep.
Like money really doesn't matter to them. What matters is people in the team is happy. They work in a team where they love being. Like I've seen several high S's that have had the opportunity to more than double their salary for getting a new job, and they're not even interested, not remotely, right? And that's really damn important to know. As well, they don't want to get in front of an audience. So again, if you have an award ceremony, even if they've done really damn well, don't put them up there because they will hate it. They hate the attention on themselves. For them, it's always about the team. It's always about, the group. They don't want to be like they like to be told they're good people, but in private, right? They
Yep.
don't want the attention. And then you have the high C's. Really, they don't give a shit. If you want to, they're like, oh yeah, I did a good job. Well, it's my job. Why do you tell me I did a good job? Like they're very logical about it, right? The best way to reward C's is instead of giving them a bonus, like give them a bigger monitor or give them a newer laptop or something that actually help them become more effective, like new
Yep.
equipment, a cooler, not a cooler, that's the wrong word for a high C. Give them a better desk or a wider desk where they can have three computers, so they can work on two while the third one is processing or whatever, right? But that sort of stuff is much more interesting to see.
Yeah.
um,
That makes sense. Yeah. So developers always, bonuses are difficult. Like most of them don't care. I found, if you're finding the good ones, like they really don't care. And so I always do that. Monitors, and I'll send them another laptop, and I'll upgrade their desk. I'll send them an ergonomic chair, like just stuff like that, because they hang on to it forever. And then you're on a Skype chat with them, and they're like, man, this thing's amazing. Like, and they're excited about it. So yeah, that makes sense. So we talked about S's then. So how do we motivate the S's if all that they care about is the team around them, so to speak, and kind of the rah-rah, so to speak, of how the team feels and how the team is? Because I've
so
been there. I've had the challenges of not being able to motivate an S whatsoever.
yeah, you motivate them by team. So if you give them an individual bonus, they will not give a shit. However, if there's
Mm,
a team bonus and they are the reason why the team doesn't get a bonus because they are not performing, that
yep.
will light a fire on them, right? And if
Good.
you help them understand and say, hey, if you don't perform and the team doesn't get a bonus, everyone else is going to be really sad. If you tell
Yep.
that to a high S, you will light a fire, I promise you, right? generally things like team events, like they love the social aspect. They're the social people. If you're like, hey, if we hit this goal as a team, we will do a get together team event, or we'll go eat lunch, or we will if the team does this thing this week, we will go and have a social thing. That will motivate us, right? So
Yep.
they're motivated by the social aspect, by the team, by yeah, any kind of events, any kind of social happenings. That super motivates them. Or even if you give them a bonus, right, instead of giving them cash, like give them a, I don't know, like a weekend away somewhere with their partner or with their family or something. Like that would be a much bigger motivation to them than cash, right?
That helps a lot. So then you mentioned communication is the other kind of big thing that
Yeah.
you focus.
So communication, high Ds don't really care how they communicate. They're looking for effectiveness. If it's more effective to grab the phone, they'll do it. If it's more effective to write an email, they'll do it, right? They look for effectiveness, speed, and just let's get shit done. High Is, they want to talk verbally, phone, voice, like we're doing here. They want it happening, right? They want to see you. They want to talk to you. For high Is, it's not about what you say. It's about how you say it, right? And they're so keen on like the tone of your voice and all that sort of stuff. If you send them a 3 paragraph email, expect them to never read it, right? They might read the first line or the first paragraph, but like if you send them a huge email, they'll never read it. If you send them a process update, their mindset is, well, if it was important, I'm sure Joe would talk to me about it. He wouldn't just email me, right? So that's very much the high Is, right? So they communicate verbally. The high S's is somewhat similar to the D's. The way they think is whatever you prefer. If you send me an email, I'll read it because it comes from you, right? Or if you call me, I would love to talk to you because I always have time for you, right? And the high C's are opposite of the I. They do written communication, right? Anything that can be done to avoid verbally talking to other human beings is like an amazing thing, right? Now, knowing that also helps you understand how to be more effective with the different kind of people. Now, I still recommend actually forcing high Cs to do like a video call and so on to get to know them and establish better relationship with them. But if you know that generally they prefer written communication, if you have to ask them for a favor, you might be better off actually putting it into an email than necessarily if you're high D, as in your case, instead of just grabbing the phone and calling them, because they will
Yep.
be a lot more comfortable with the emails. You can include more details, and it's much easier for them to revert back and ask questions because they generally will have, right?
Yep. That makes perfect sense. So you talked about earlier your outsourcing company, and so I'm curious. You said you're working with mostly SEOs and e-com companies. Are you helping entrepreneurs decide what to delegate and what tasks to get off their plate, or are you letting them kind of figure that out, or what's the boundary there? Where do you coach people to to get rid of tasks, or how to decide, or how to prioritize, etc.
Yeah, so obviously in my coaching, I definitely coach people with that sort of stuff. With the
Yep.
outsourcing, I obviously we talk to people, right? Generally with the outsourcing, and particularly if it's in the beginning, what I always recommend people is pick repeatable processes, right?
Yeah.
So for e-commerce, things like customer service,
Yep.
like keyword research, like uploading content to a website or adding products or anything that's repeatable, right? Because a lot of people, they would hire a VA and then they would spend half an hour finding something the VA can spend 1 hour doing. And yeah, that saves them half an hour, but it's constant. And what end up
Yep.
happening if you do that is you spend so much time, like you still save time, but you spend so much time doing it that your time saving is a lot less. So I always recommend that you actually start by taking tasks that, you teach them how to do customer service, that will generally take you a chunk of time, but then they can keep doing it all day, every day, right? Like obviously they'll still have questions and stuff, but it's like you teach them one skill and then it's something that happens every single day, right? And
Yep.
from an SEO standpoint, that could be things like putting reports together or doing like SEO audits and things like that, like stuff that's repetitive, right? Because it's where you get the biggest savings and it's where you put the least pressure on yourself. Because
Yep.
every time, like so often I hear people like, oh, I have this VA for 40 hours. I need to make up some work for them. Or I have to find some work. And the problem is when you get into that situation, what happens is often you actually end up finding them work that doesn't make sense and isn't your priority. But people are like, oh, I'm paying this guy a couple of bucks an hour. I should be utilizing him. And I tell my clients the opposite. Like, even if you only use a guy 30 hours a week, it's still a huge financial benefit, right? So what I like to suggest to people is to have some tasks that I call forever tasks. So that could be something like lead generation, or for SEO, some kind of outreach, link building, or they have a task that if they have nothing else, that's what they go do, right? And in a lot of businesses, you can find tasks like that, right? But
Yep.
that gives you that freedom to sort of say, okay, I don't want to drop everything I'm doing right now to go and make up some work for this guy. He have something or she have something she can go and do, right? So that's sort of my high level sort of recommendations in regards to that.
I like that. Yeah, the forever tasks. Yeah, so often I find people, my students, making that fatal mistake of giving themselves a part-time job just to keep their assistants or VAs busy, right? And it's just like you said, it's like they have a half an hour of work to do so that they can outsource something that takes an hour, and then they just end up in that spiral forever.
And the benefit is if you teach people a bunch of these repeatable processes and they work for you for a while, what happens is they start understanding and learning things that when you have some one-off task actually becomes a lot faster because they have much more understanding and experience at that point, right? So it's easier to actually start out with the repeatable stuff and then later on go into, and that could be longer, like that could be something you spend half an hour teaching someone to do something for 8 hours, right? But
Yep.
yeah, I mean that again, the more experience they have, one of the things people always forget is how well they know their own business. Like the thing is, if you've ever had a day job, when you walk into a new company on day number one, you're like, what the hell is this thing? What's going on? What's it all about? What do they do? Like the thing is, you can't just hire someone and say, oh, by the way, here's this task, can you go do it, right? Like, and
Yeah.
so much that's where I see people fail, right? A lot of the time people VAs get a crap reputation sometimes, and very often, and in majority of cases, it's actually the people managing them that are struggling. It's not the VAs themselves. I mean, VAs are human beings, but as I always say, no one show up to work to do a bad job. Like no one
Yep.
walks into a job and says, today I want to do crap work, right? So if people are not doing good work, it's often down to either processes, instructions, the management, like that. There's usually something behind it. Now, okay, there is people that you should never hire and have a horrible attitude and things like that, but hopefully your hiring process will help not bring those into the company in the first place, right?
Yep.
So yeah.
So with the outsourcing company, are you guys really like helping? You're helping interface the relationship, and that's kind of
Yeah,
where
so
you
basically
let it
what we
go,
do,
right?
our managers are responsible to handle everything personal, everything like, oh, my microphone isn't working, or my aunt is dead, or it's my daughter's birthday, and like all sorts of personal stuff we try and help them with so that our clients only need to tell them what to do and how to do it, right? So the clients, but and a lot of people say, oh, well, that's the main thing. But reality is, if you've ever had employees, you will know how much time that personal stuff sucks up, right? So
Sure.
we have found it to be hugely beneficial. When we first started out, we were basically just pairing up VAs with customers, and we just found it so often it never worked out, and we kept thinking, oh, we're finding the right people. But as soon as we started supporting with the people management aspect, like I think the last 3 years, we've had, I mean, we have over 120 people now, and we have had three, maybe four people leave, right?
Yeah.
In that period. I mean, that's a ridiculous retention rate at any scale, right? But the thing is, Filipinos generally are looking for stable income, right? They're looking for stable jobs. If they find it, they're generally very, very loyal, right? Now, the
100%.
times they leave is either if they have a problem with you and they're too afraid to tell you. Like sometimes, and again, there's a Filipino culture thing, but if you forget to pay their salary, they'll probably not tell you, right? Until like 2 weeks later, and they're like, boss, you remember that thing you normally send to me every month? I haven't had it yet. Maybe there's a mistake with my bank. And you're like, oh
Yep.
shit, I forgot, I'm busy, right? But
Yep.
but that's unfortunately the nature. So often they tend to be a little bit timid in that regard.
Yep.
But again, like if you manage them well, if you have good management experience, it's often a less of an issue. But a lot of people starting an online business, they haven't got a ton of management experience, right? So for them, it's really, really beneficial that they have some support.
100%. Yeah, I find that completely. And definitely the Filipino culture is amazing, but it has its flaws or drawbacks just like any other culture. And I think
Yeah.
you gotta understand it and you gotta deal with it. And we have Filipinos on our team that have been with us for 4, 5, even 6 years, that have been part of the team working every day remotely, Monday through Friday, for us for a long time. So very, very good, honest, hardworking people, for sure. But yeah, timid is a key or a trait that I would say is very normal, at least in my experience. Sometimes it's just like, if that's what you've been thinking, like why haven't you just asked me that like 2 weeks ago? Like why don't you just ask? I would have told you. So yeah, I agree.
And even some of the simple things like, boss, you're not actually giving me a lot of work, can be
Yeah,
hard. But that's the kind of things you want to know, right?
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Like if people feel like they have much more capacity and stuff, that's great to know, right? Like sometimes, and as I say, like again, what you pay for these VAs, like the focus should not be get 40 hours out of them. Like even have training stuff, have some training courses they can take when there's downtime and stuff is hugely beneficial, right?
Yep.
But again, if you are busy and if you think they're busy but they actually have more capacity, you definitely want to know.
So when we were doing research on you, and in your academy, you say that a high level skill is not the most important thing to look at when assessing candidates. Can you talk about that a little bit and tell us why you think
Yeah.
that?
So and it obviously depends a little bit, right? Like for example, if I'm going to the hospital and getting a surgery, I would prefer to have someone that actually knows what they're doing. But in general, for majority of internet business, most things aren't too complicated, right? Like when you're looking at SEO, when you're looking at e-commerce, like majority of the things aren't complicated to learn. So like our focus is always making sure we find people who have amazing mindset and attitude because the actual skills can be learned. Now, exception, if you're looking for a developer, you probably want someone who have some developer experience, else it's going to take them a long time to figure it out, right? But you still want people with great attitude and mentality. But for me, like attitude and mentality trumps everything, right? Like you always want to find great people, and when you find amazing people, honestly, like I don't care what skill set they have because they will learn things really quickly. Like if they're eager, if they're like if there's something they don't know and they open YouTube and they try and figure it out by themselves and stuff. Like if you get great people like that, it's worth 2, 3 very skilled people who have a shit attitude, or like one of the things we stopped hiring from the best university that there is in Davao City where we are, simply because like a lot of the people coming from there is very privileged, right? They're very like they often have rich parents. They come in and they're expecting a huge pay, and they're expecting like so far their life have been pretty easy, right? Because often with rich families, they don't necessarily have so much pressure, and
Yep.
we've had so much bad experiences. Whereas out any day, like English skills obviously critical, but I would any day rather hire someone with good English who really wants to right? Like a lot of the people we hire have no education. Like it's people who haven't had the financial resources to get a quote good education, but they're so eager, right? Like they're so eager, they're so willing, like they will do what it takes, because when you give them the chance, when you give them an opportunity and you teach them things, they first of all they get a chance to make a living in a very good way, and they're often so thankful for that I mean they'll go through hell, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And for me that's worth so much more than someone who have had a 4-year education in whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I completely agree. For me and in my business, as an agency business, as an info and training business as well, and software company, I find that there's really only like three kind of specialties that we have, and the rest can be kind of we hire for attitude and we hire for that definitely above everything else. And so I wanted to share these three with you and get your feedback and see if you think that there's any others, or maybe if
Yeah,
I'm overthinking it a little bit. So for us, like a high-end writer, like if we're going to be writing content and showcasing our brand or showcasing one of our clients' brands, when the run-of-the-mill, so to speak, won't work, like that for us is a specialist, right? Like if we're going to go pitch, Forbes or CNN or even one of our own industry publications on a piece of content, and I'm not going to write it, right? It's going to have to be somebody that's going to represent my brand, or our customers' brands well. And then second is designers, right? And then third would be developers.
yeah, yeah. So I would say those are all three where you need to have definitely a level of it, right? Like
Yeah,
for example, with writers, with designers, like they might not be there already, but they
yeah.
might be here, so that they might still need some learning. But yeah, definitely you want some kind of skill set, right? No doubt, right? So and that makes total sense to me.
And even like we hire writers that aren't here though. But we understand that they're not there and maybe they will get there over time, but we don't put them in situations where we expect here.
Exactly, right? So I mean that's one of my favorite things. Like we hire a ton of interns, both really to test people out and see, because I mean you can see a bunch from interviews, right? But there's no better test of fire than actually getting people in and like getting see how they do, they show up on time every day, are they eager, are they sitting like, oh, what's the next thing I have to do, and oh well I was here 8 hours today so I should get paid, and like you can very quickly see that when you see people working, right? And you can see who's smart. And I mean, we love hiring a lot of these sort of home-based computer gamers who have never done anything than playing computer. And the reason for that is they're often super freaking fast, right? Like we're using keyboard, copy pasting, like not that that's a skill in itself, copy pasting, but that the speed of which where you do things on a computer
Yeah.
definitely have something to say with a lot of the work that gets churned out in the online world, right? The faster you are with a computer, the better.
That's interesting. Yeah, thinking about some of the best like developers that I've ever had as well. A lot of them have been gamers, and like their speed is just ridiculous. Like they know every shortcut, and I'm like, What did you just do there?" And they're like, "Oh, that's this shortcut." And I'm like, "What? Like I never heard about that." Like, okay, thanks. Like that's great.
And
So yeah,
that's
interesting.
exactly like the gamers that it's using keyboards, using shortcuts, using like the speed at which it happens. Like we for our clients, like we do a lot of manual stuff. Like that could be things like outreach and finding like research and stuff. And like the speed they're using the computer at makes a huge difference to the output, right?
Cool. So when you think about DISC, how do you think DISC really applies to management? Let's say somebody has a team right now. Like what are the big things? You said obviously communication, but what are the other big ways that they should be thinking about using DISC when it comes to managing an existing team?
I mean, for me, the key thing is the right people for the right job, right? So
Yep.
again, utilizing people's strength and figuring out what are they naturally really good at. Some
Okay.
people, some people naturally will be really good with Excel. They just never learned the app, right? And being able to see the difference between who could learn it and be really good and who will never learn it and always be shit or always be not so good, it makes a huge difference, right? Huge difference.
100%. 100%. So we were talking about hiring people, and you mentioned that you're hiring a lot of people and then getting them into a job role and then seeing how they perform and how they do before kind of making a longer term decision. Is that how you guys typically hire? Is that how you like to hire?
No, we do both. So actually, the reason why we do the internship is that we work with a lot of organizations locally in the Philippines where we are, who do like different virtual assistant training and stuff. And
Okay.
we like giving people a chance to come in and do like an internship and see like what they're like, right? Because again, if we see a group of 20 or 30 people, there's likely to be one or two really amazing people in there, right? And that gives us an opportunity to sort of pluck some cream of the crop. But majority of people we hire is more interview based, right? Like more recruitment based. So yeah.
So when thinking about DISC, do you think that you can take the DISC principles and use them not only for team members, right, but use them when prospecting or dealing with prospects or dealing
All
with
the time.
clients?
I mean,
Are you teaching your team DISC, right? Like is, I guess, like to turn this thing around.
yeah, I mean, I've been training a lot of salespeople. Like for salespeople to be able to use Disc is super powerful because again, most salespeople have their way of doing things, and if they're talking to people like themselves, that's great. But sometimes they need to adjust, right? Like most high
Yep.
Cs, when they see a typical salesperson, they cringe. They're like, "Oh, this guy
Yeah.
is just blabbing. He doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. He's just blabbing, right?" And as a salesperson, if you're not able to connect to the customer like that, you're losing a sale.
And the same with management. Yeah. Readjusting your approach with DISC could make a whole lot of sense. Awesome. So we've covered a lot so far, and man, you've been over delivering and giving a ton of value. Thank you. What have we missed? What do you think that we've missed that potentially we need to chat about before we wrap this thing up?
Um, Again, unfortunately, it's only a 1 hour show, but um, yeah, I think, I mean, my favorite thing in the world is to talk about from a coaching perspective is delegation, right? But I think unfortunately we'll have to do that another time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say generally for people really um, learning to utilize the power of other people is really critical, right? And learning to do that well. If you're an online entrepreneur and you're the one of them doing it everything yourself, yes, you can make money. Yes, you can make pretty good money. But if you want to build a business, that's very different skill set, right? And actually, like where I see most businesses go wrong is like they would invest in training courses for the people to learn SEO, learn e-commerce, but no one actually invests in management, right? And just as you said in the beginning, oh, we've never had anyone who does management, and that's what I see everywhere. Like people get promoted all the time into a position of management, but there's no training being done for them, right? And that's why, I mean, initially that was why I developed a course specifically for managers, because this is so powerful for companies to be able to actually give to their employees, right?
Yep.
And the management course I developed was really targeted toward business owners and also the managers within those businesses who gets that step up and it's like, 2 minutes ago I was doing this job, now I'm the manager, and that's not the same thing. Right? It's two
Yeah.
very different things, and actually investing both the time and the resources into really giving people and giving your managers good training pays off like wildly compared to buying them another SEO course or whatever you're doing, right? So
That makes a ton of sense. Okay, cool. So last question then, instead of asking you to recommend, a book or three books at the end like most podcasts do, right? I want to do something a little different. And I want to ask you, like, what's the one book that you can look at and you can correlate to having the biggest impact on the way that you do business?
it's called First Break All the Rules, What the World's Greatest Managers Do Differently. And what that really taught me was like, I'm not a typical manager in a large organization like IBM. Like most managers in IBM are uh, very driven, very similar personality to yourself, like very like tuck, 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 right? And it really helped me understand that, like, even as an entrepreneur, like, you don't have to be like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. The whole thing is actually trying not to be like them if you're not. The whole
Yep.
thing is figuring out what is your key strength from a management standpoint. What are you really good at? And how do you become the best manager with that as your forte, right? That's really the for me the big thing, right? So, and that's really the book, I would say, that makes the biggest difference. I mean, from a learning perspective, Disc was definitely it, but this was the book that really helped me get a good understanding that was really valuable for me.
Awesome, man. Thank you. Great resource. Definitely will be checking out that book. I appreciate that. So, Mads, in the show notes, I want to link up to the places that are important for you, right? Like, where can people go and communicate with you? Obviously, we'll link to Aristo. Where else should we be linking to for you in the
Yeah,
show
so my,
notes?
my management site, masssingers.com, that's also
Okay.
where I have my management course, which is uh, really popular. Then Aristo Sourcing is good, and then yeah, I mean, I'm generally on everywhere. So I have
Okay.
LinkedIn, Facebook, all the social channels and stuff. Uh, yeah, I love talking to people. I love helping people. I love connecting. So networking is key.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it again, and maybe we'll have to do it again in the future. We can actually get into some of the other delegating stuff.
Sounds exciting. Thank you very much, Joe.
Awesome,
It was a
Mads.
pleasure being here.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, buddy. Have a great one.
You too.